Welcome to HortTube. My name is Jim Putnam. This is the Sunday garden question and answer video that I do most Sundays of every month. The first Sunday of every month is a subscriber Sunday video where subscribers send in photos of things in their yard that they're proud of. If you're interested in sending in photos for that, the email address is right here. I think we have one more question and answer next Sunday, and then the subscriber Sunday the week after that. I've already got a ton of photos for it. Last month was the record number by far. This next month even more so. If you send in photos for that, turn your phone sideways, take them widescreen, because that's how YouTube shows off your stuff, and send me a big file rather than send me 5 little tiny photos where you size them down to fit into the email. Send me one big one that really shows it off. This Wednesday's landscape update video should be good. If you follow me on Instagram, I've showed all the containers that I got from Michael Carr Designs yesterday, and all the plants that are going in them. You'll see all of that on Wednesday. Also, my vegetable garden will go in this week. I hope to get started on this greenhouse very soon. I've ordered a shade cloth for it, and we'll start on the lumber and all that. If you're following along on the Wednesday landscape update videos, this should be a good one this week. And had a good amount of questions from last week's video, so we'll go ahead and get started on that. I get a lot of questions about people, they transplant the plant and then of course it's wilting. It looks like it needs water. Of course you can water it all day long. It's not going to do any good because you cut off about half the roots when you moved it. And so, when you transplant something, especially while it's actively growing, and this is really key. If you moved it, let's say November, December, January, and it wasn't actively growing, you can kind of normally get away with moving the whole plant and not cutting it back. But if it's actively growing, you need to take the new growth off when you move it, and that's really the key. Just take off an inch or two off the very ends of all the branches where the new growth is, and I promise you it will transplant much better. And that's true. I've covered this in a summer. Yeah, I think I got a video called my #1 summer planting tip or something like that, and it literally just cut the plant a little bit when you plant it, because you're going to do some root damage. And so then you're not going to have the volume of roots in order to supply the top of the plant any longer. So pruning, it's a good tip and it works great. And when I landscaped, and I've said this before, when I landscaped in the past, I didn't trust the customers were going to water the plants well when I left. So there were lots of times between about May 15th and September 15th, before we left a job, we took the tips of all the branches off the plants, and that prevented them from needing as much water. Okay. Somebody said they had a hydrangea. They dug it out of the ground and it divided into 3 pieces, and wanted to know if that was normal. Some hydrangeas will sucker some, and they do readily sucker. And you can also lay branches down on hydrangeas and cover them and get them to root into the ground like that. What's more likely happen though is frequently now growers will stick 1, 2, 3 cuttings when they stick their cuttings, and so that they end up with finished plants faster by putting like 3 plants in the container. So it's some possibility that you actually bought one that had, it was actually 3 plants. When you bought it, they just looked like they were a single plant. You can see that frequently on things you buy now, is that growers are, in order to speed up the process, they'll take 3 cuttings on a compacta holly or a boxwood or something like that and put them in one container. So my guess is that's what it was. Somebody asked me about something to grow under an oak tree in zone 7. I'm in zone 7. I had a big willow oak at the last house, and I had Yopon hollies under it that competed fantastic. But here's the thing, they were planted at the same time that oak was. If you're coming back to an established oak tree like that, you really do need to run drip irrigation through the bed. You're going to have to water. If I plant the plant out here in the open and there's no root competition, I might have 1 season of giving it extra water and extra attention and thinking about it before it gets established and can compete with the other plants out here. If you plant something under an oak tree, it might take 2 or 3 years for that thing to really get rooted out and be anchored in place and really be able to put up a fight against a mature oak tree. So keep that in mind. If you're planting under an established tree, you're going to be committed to watering those for a long time. And so I would probably run drip irrigation when you plant it, and that way you don't have to think about it all the time. Okay, somebody asked me about planting in stumps, like they had some stumps ground out and they were going to plant in them and what material to use. you have to assume it's not going to drain very well because you basically created a pot without a drain hole in the ground. And so I would definitely put pine bark soil conditioner if you can find it, which is what these plants are grown in the nurseries, is pine bark soil conditioner. So some combination of compost and pine bark soil conditioner would work perfect, and that would allow the water to drain, you know, through to the bottom of the little cup in the stump. But even then, you got to be careful not to overwater. Somebody asked me, they were from the Carteret Master Gardeners program, wanted to know if I do talks for Master Gardeners programs, and I do. You can contact me through the horttube@gmail.com email address, and we can talk about it. And then last week I said that next year's plan was to tour the 48 states. Of course, I meant the 48 contiguous states, and you know, I realize Alaska and Hawaii are states, and I would love to go and do some botanizing in those states as well. You know, and go to the gardens, obviously. In Hawaii, who wouldn't? But I did mean 48 contiguous states, the ones that I can drive to. Well, I can drive to Alaska too. I know that. Okay, because that's going to be the next one. Okay, somebody asked me about liming and how long it takes. Lime actually does take a little while unless you were incorporating it in the soil to actually, you know, penetrate and get mixed in. Usually the freeze-thaw process in the winter, it's usually a good time to put it out in the fall because that freeze-thaw effect, you know, of the soil expanding and contracting in the wintertime will allow it to work its way in a little quicker. And they wanted to know if I would use pellet lime or dolomitic lime or, you know, powdered lime. You know, powdered lime is, if you have a big space, you want to use probably a pelleted product just because it's easier. You can run it through a spreader. Powdered lime is, you know, would be just a dusty mess over a big space. The biggest issue here is if you have a soil test and you need to see where your calcium and magnesium ratios are. If you need calcium added, you need to use a lime that's a calcium lime. You can get a seashell lime product. A lot of the fast-acting limes, you'll see fast-acting lime. Usually those are calcium-based limes. The other dolomitic lime has a lot of magnesium in it, and so I'm careful. You know, I would, if I needed to lime, I would look at that and see if on your soil test, because they had gotten a soil test done, if your calcium was low, then I would use a calcium-based lime, and if your magnesium was low, I would use dolomitic lime. That needs to be taken into consideration, really. Somebody asked me when to move a viburnum that was too close to the house. It's about 8 feet tall. You could probably do it now, but again, like I said earlier in the video, I would cut it hard. If you've got something that's that well established, you could probably take a third out of the top of it and go ahead and move it right now and get away with it. You know, the closer we get to summer, the worse time of year it is. So if you slid into May, I'd probably say no and do it in October instead. Of course, it's going to be even bigger then. So I would probably do some pruning on it during the season and just keep it down so you don't have to hack it in half later in the season. Okay, somebody asked me, that same person asked me when was the best time to remove landscape fabric, and probably when it's dry. If you go through any period of time this year where it's drier, it's going to be a much easier process. If it's soppy, wet, and we've gotten a lot, Holly, no. If it's, sorry, Holly's over here eating something as always. If it's really wet outside and you start taking up that fabric, number one, it'll smell bad under that fabric. Anybody who's had landscape fabric and taken it out before, if the soil underneath it's wet, it smells horrible. So I would wait for drier conditions, you know, where it doesn't rain for 10 days or something, and then go after it, get it out of there quick. I get a ton of questions about what to grow in difficult spaces all over the country. And, you know, as an example, one of them this week was in Tennessee, in an area that has a lot of limestone, so the pH is going to be super high. It's hard to dig in that soil, you know, what to grow in that space. And I have to say, if I was going to give a general answer to this, is you really do need to explore the area that you live in and see what you like. Almost on a daily basis, I spend time walking around Raleigh, and you know, if you follow me on Instagram, you'll see tons of those photos that I take, and I don't put up probably 10% of the photos I take in a given day on Instagram that I find unique, interesting things. But by doing that, you can really see within your general area what works really well in your area, and then you can go about identifying those plants. And there's several ways to do that. You can take a leaf off of something and go to your local garden center. Hopefully there's somebody there that would be able to identify it. Or, you know, there's a lot of these plant ID apps you can buy for your phone now that you can, they're good, but not necessarily great, but you know, they'll get you in the general category of, you know, of what most plants are. And so, but that would be my suggestion to lots of you, is really go around the area and see what is thriving, what it really thrives in my neighborhood, you know, rather than, you know, going and letting the box store or the garden center or whatever they have looking great, you know, at that time decide what you're going to grow. I mean, you know, like I said, the other strategy is to go and look, walk around, spend some time seeing what works in your area, and then, like I say, try to identify them. Okay, somebody asked me how long to stake a tree formed wisteria. You know, wisteria, generally speaking, is a vining thing that grows all up in the trees everywhere, but you can buy them as single trunk trees. I would think that it's going to have to be staked for a long time. I've seen those things flop over for a long time, but you're going to have to increase the size of the stake, and then you can tie it off in a different place. And so I would leave it on the stake it came with maybe for a few months, and then go buy yourself a larger piece of bamboo or whatever it's staked with and restake it, but then tie it in a different spot so you're not continually choking the same spots that where the stretchy tape was tied to. But that green stretch tape is the best thing to use, and a piece of bamboo or something of slightly larger size. But it may be that the rest of this year, and maybe through next winter, I would probably keep it staked, and then after that try to unstake it. Hold on. Okay, so I had said in an old propagation video that plants, they need to go dormant in the wintertime. And the person was wondering why, because maybe you could just keep your, you know, plants that lose their leaves, or plants that, you know, are outside, you just keep them warm all winter in a greenhouse. Here's the thing, a lot of plants will actually need chill hours in order to flower or bloom. So take like a blueberry as an example. If you left a blueberry in a greenhouse all winter long, they actually require a certain amount of dormancy. These plants are evolved in certain spaces to not be tricked by early springs, okay, false springs, okay, meaning that it gets cold. Let's say it gets cold in your area November 1st, and typically sometime around mid-April, and you know that's kind of where it contains the worst of the winter. But sometime in January it hits 75 degrees, okay? But these plants have figured out those little false winters, and so what they've basically done is put themselves on a timer to stay asleep for a certain amount of hours during the winter before they'll wake up. Blueberries are a great example of that. They require a certain amount of hours below a certain temperature through the winter, and then they wake up. And so that's one reason, okay? The other one is there's actually cell degeneration that happens in things that don't have their normal sleep cycles. And you can see a plant actually senesce or get smaller over time. It's the same thing, you know, you can't live on an hour's worth of sleep, you know, same as these plants. And maximum growth on plants occurs with their natural sleep and wake cycle. Okay, so that sleep period of time is what builds the energy for it to fire off in the spring and be able to put on, you know, some of these plants, you know, heck, there's a mulberry right here that I'm going to cut down soon. It's probably grown, it's near a foot of growth, and we're April 15th. But it did that because it went to sleep back in October and saved up that energy all winter long to fire off and race ahead of everything. So anyway, there's lots of different reasons why plants need to be cold treated in the wintertime. And I hope I don't confuse people with that, but there's probably even more reasons than that. So keep them cold but not frozen. Okay. Let's see. Okay, somebody asked me, this will be the last question for this week, about plants leafing out toward the bottom and still being naked up toward the top. And that's a normal occurrence. The ground temperature, hydrangeas are very common in hydrangeas. They actually asked about a beautyberry. But you'll see plants, they'll put on their initial leaves right from the base. And that's just the nature of the soil being warmer than the air temperature above it. And so the plant's, you know, able to leaf out right down at the base, and then, you know, over the course of the month of April or whatever you are in the country, you'll see the foliage, you know, come to life up the stems all the way to the top. But like I say, that's the soil temperature being warmer than the air temperature above it. Thank you very much for following along with these question and answer videos. You can ask questions down below this video and I will pick from those to answer next Sunday. Thanks again.